Hey guys, tonight we're not entering through the grand marble gates of the Forum or strolling past a parade of triumphal arches. No, tonight we're easing quietly into a small backstreet in Sabura, Rome's dense, noisy, wonderfully greasy heart. The sky overhead is already shifting to a dusty amber, casting a warm, tired glow on the clay walls and crooked tiled roofs. A light breeze carries the smell of frying oil, overripe olives, singed rosemary, and the unmistakable tang of fish sauce. Beneath your sandals, the cobblestones are warm and slick with centuries of crushed crumbs, splattered broth, and the occasional, unmentionable. But don't worry. This is dinner time in ancient Rome, and you're about to discover that the empire didn't run on banquets, it ran on snacks. You probably wouldn't survive a full Roman menu, not without a very forgiving stomach and possibly divine intervention, but that's okay. We're here to ease in, bite by bite. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where and when you're listening, your city and your time. I love knowing which corners of the world this sleepy stroll is reaching. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk slowly along the uneven stones, listening to the soft clatter of sandal soles on the street. Around you, voices rise and fall, not loud, not frantic, just the hum of a city winding down. Somewhere nearby, a flute plays lazily. There's a boy selling nuts from a cone of parchment, his fingers glossy with oil. A woman, carrying a basket of still warm bread, passes you without a glance. You're not a tourist here. You're just another hungry Roman with a few coins and an appetite for something hot, salty, and handheld. Then you see it. Tucked between a dye shop and a stairwell, smoke curling like a ribbon from a shallow bronze brazier, is your first thermopolium. It doesn't look like much at first, just a stone counter, darkened with years of use, but as you approach, the little details reveal themselves. For dolia, large sunken clay jars, are set into the counter, and each one breathes steam. One smells of lentils and leeks. Another of chickpeas in broth. A third holds something with barley and pork fat. The last is harder to pin down, thick, reddish, sharp with vinegar and fish. You stop. The vendor, an older man with shoulders like amphorae and forearms dusted with flour, gestures silently toward the jars. He doesn't need to speak. He knows what you're here for. Mainstream fact, thermopolia were everywhere. In Pompeii alone, over 150 have been excavated, some with entire cooking implements still in place, others frozen in the moment of the eruption. These stalls weren't side gigs. They were the lifeblood of Roman food culture. A majority of urban Romans lived in cramped tenements, insulae, that often had no kitchens. Cooking at home meant dealing with smoke, fire, and costly fuel. Why bother, when the street offered something hot, fast, and relatively cheap? You pull a sestertius from your pouch, warm from your palm, scratched and smoothed by time, and place it gently on the counter. The man nods, selects a well-worn clay bowl, and ladles in a thick stew. It's greenish, oily, and utterly mysterious. Fringe detail. Some thermopolia owners carved the names of dishes, or drawings of them, into the wall. You might see a painted squid, a little cluster of grapes, or even a sketched-out pig's foot. Think of it as the Roman version of a menu board, if your board were painted in wine residue and soot. The counter, now that you look closer, is beautiful. Not clean, not pristine, but beautiful. Cracked marble inlay sparkles under soot and steam. Bits of red porphyry, green serpentine, and ochre travertine catch the flicker of torchlight, forming a kind of mosaic. A crude design, maybe, possibly even random, but somehow it feels intentional. Like someone cared. You take your bowl and step back. The stew is hot, really hot, and it smells, not bad. Like garlic, rosemary, vinegar, and something vaguely animal. You find a low wall and sit, careful not to spill. Nearby, a cat watches you with suspicion, while a dog sleeps with its head resting on an overturned basket. You try a bite. The texture is soft, a little too soft, but the flavor is deep, salty, acidic, herby, complex. You can't name all the ingredients, but there's definitely a hint of fish. Not fish itself, but garum, that legendary Roman fermented fish sauce. It was their ketchup, their soy sauce, their Worcestershire, all in one bottle. And yes, we'll come back to garum later. You're only just beginning to taste the empire. Across the street, another vendor is serving something different. Thick slices of panis fritas, fried bread soaked in garlic oil and served hot from the pan. A courier stops by, downs a ladle of lentil mash, and moves on without breaking stride. Further down, a woman with hair wrapped in golden wire scoops honeyed dates onto a plate, flicking off flies with casual grace. You're in the middle of a dinner rush. It's loud, it's messy, and it's deeply alive. Now for the debate. Historians still argue whether thermopolia were viewed with pride or disdain. Literary elites like Seneca and Martial often sneered at them, describing them as places of noise, disorder, and questionable morals. Martial, always dramatic, once joked that you could buy indigestion for a single coin at one. But graffiti and inscriptions tell a different story. Some stalls were family-run for generations. Some vendors were minor local celebrities. And some served dishes considered better than what noble houses could offer. So were they lowbrow dives, or beloved neighborhood staples? As usual with history, probably both. You glance back at your bowl. It's nearly empty. Somehow, the last few bites went down easier than the first. You don't feel full, exactly, but you do feel anchored, like you've tasted something old, honest, and oddly comforting. You spot another thermopolium across the square, smoke drifting lazily from its chimney. Its counter glows red under the firelight. You know the menu will be different. Every stall had its own personality, its own spice ratios, its own rhythms. In some ways, it's like walking through a living recipe book, each page seasoned by centuries, each flavor a whisper from the past. Above you, the sky is turning purple. The first stars blink into sight, faint but steady. Around you, the street settles into its nighttime rhythm. Voices fade. Doors creak closed. Oil lamps flicker into life behind worn shutters. And you? You stay seated for a little while longer, letting the sounds and smells wash over you. This wasn't a feast. It wasn't fancy. But it was Rome, and in its own quiet, steaming, slightly greasy way, it was enough. You stay seated on that sun-warmed ledge a little longer than you meant to, letting the last of the bean stew settle somewhere between satisfaction and suspicion. Around you, the street continues its quiet exhale. Someone nearby is scrubbing pots with sand. A door slams in the distance. The breeze smells faintly of singed wheat and charcoal. And then, like a nudge from history itself, you catch a new scent wafting your way, nutty, crisp, and ever so slightly gamey. It's coming from just around the bend, and curiosity, more than hunger, pulls you up onto your feet again. You follow the smell with the quiet shuffle of someone hoping not to be seen hesitating. The cobblestones are uneven beneath your sandals, worn smooth by centuries of foot traffic. A flicker of flame appears ahead, licking up from a brazier nestled beneath a cracked archway. Its glow reveals another vendor, this one surrounded by baskets of herbs, little dishes of honey and crushed peppercorn, and a rack of tiny, brown creatures. They're unmistakable. Mice. Not the kind that sneak into grain stores or scamper across bakery floors. These are dormice, glur, to the Romans, larger than your average mouse, bred in captivity for the sole purpose of being eaten. And not just eaten, celebrated. You've just stumbled into one of Rome's stranger delicacies, and yes, this was absolutely a real thing. Mainstream fact, the edible dormouse was not only farmed in special ceramic jars called gluraria, tiny, dark vessels designed to keep the animals sleepy and fat, but they were also a well-documented favorite at elite Roman feasts. Wealthy hosts would offer them stuffed with pork, nuts, and spices, served whole and presented with the kind of flourish usually reserved for fruit baskets or flamingos. You watch silently as the vendor, barefoot, quick-fingered, and humming tunelessly, plucks a cooked dormouse from the rack. He slices it open gently, exposing a dense, glistening interior of minced meat and herbs, steam rising into the cool evening air. He spoons a bit of sweet date syrup over it, sprinkles poppy seeds like snowflakes, and adds a dusting of ground cumin. Then, with a practiced motion, he folds a fig leaf over the whole thing and places it on a clay plate, extending it to the customer without a word. You don't reach for your coin just yet. You're still processing. Fringe detail. Some versions of the dish were sewn shut before cooking, literally stitched closed with thread, like a soft little meat purse. In high-status homes, they might even be painted with edible gold leaf or served in miniature silver cages, more spectacle than snack. The point wasn't just to feed your guests, it was to provoke a reaction. Disgust, delight, or delight at the disgust. Sound familiar? But here, in this dark alley, there are no silver cages. Just a bronze grill, a shallow dish of briny sauce, and the faint crackle of fat hitting flame. You take a few slow steps forward and lean gently against the stone wall, watching as another dormouse is turned over the fire. This one's been skewered on a stick of rosemary, the leaves sizzling and spitting as they kiss the coals. You catch a waft of toasted pine nuts, burnt honey, and something faintly metallic, maybe liver. Or just the iron tang of blood cooked down to caramel. Someone behind you clears their throat. You move aside instinctively as a boy of maybe 10 approaches, slapping a coin into the vendor's palm and reaching eagerly for his prize. He holds it like a meat lollipop, bites in without hesitation, and walks off chewing, head tilted skyward like he's just been handed the moon. And that's the part that surprises you. It's not the elite eating mice here. It's kids. Messengers. Bakers on break. People in dusty sandals and threadbare tunics, their hands stained with soot and ink and fish brine. The dormouse, once a symbol of opulence, seems to have trickled down the class ladder, fried and simplified into a kind of Roman street kebab. And it makes you wonder, how often do luxuries become common once no one's looking? Which brings us to our open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether these creatures were truly an everyday snack or just a festive indulgence. Most of our knowledge comes from elite recipe books like Apicius, and elite writers loved a bit of culinary exaggeration. But bones of dormice have been found not only in villas but in middling households too, and even in taverns. Some say they were everywhere. Others insist they were rare and overhyped. Like ancient caviar, only furrier. The vendor catches your eye. Without asking, he spears one on a twig and holds it out toward you, still sizzling, glistening with oil and syrup. You hesitate. For a moment, the world narrows to this one tiny creature. Crisp skin. Folded paws. Tail still intact, curled slightly as if in sleep. It's both unappetizing and oddly tender. You imagine its life, fed on chestnuts, lulled into drowsiness, pampered like a prince, then basted and browned like a roast potato. You take it. The vendor grins. You don't bite. Not yet. You're still absorbing the gravity of holding in your hand something that Cicero may have refused, but Nero probably adored. A food that was both taboo and fashionable, both a delicacy and, depending on your perspective, a dare. You carry it for a while, still warm in your palm, as you walk toward a quieter corner. Around you, Rome exhales. Somewhere nearby, a man is singing drunkenly about a goat. A woman pours wine into chipped cups. A baby wails from an upper window and is hushed with a lullaby so soft you barely notice it. You sit down again, back against the cool wall of a bread shop. A candle flickers behind its iron grate. You look down at the dormouse. It's cooled now. Less shiny. Almost pitiful. But it's still food. Still history. Still part of this world you're slipping into, bite by hesitant bite. And that, you realize, is what makes Roman cuisine so unforgettable. Not just the scale of it, the banquets, the exotic ingredients, the sauces that smell like shipwrecks, but the fact that every flavor tells a story. Of class. Of conquest. Of curiosity. Of people making do with what they had, or what they dared. You take one small bite. It's not bad. The skin is crisp, the meat is sweet and peppery, and the aftertaste lingers just long enough to make you question your life choices. You smile, just slightly, and wipe your fingers on the hem of your tunic. Ahead, someone is roasting pine cones. Behind you, you think you hear the crunch of someone else trying their first mouse. You're not alone in this. You sit quietly for a few more moments beneath the soft flicker of the bread shop's lantern, letting the last trace of your adventurous mouse morsel dissolve on your tongue. It wasn't delicious, not in the way warm bread or fresh fruit might be, but it was dense with time. Every bite, every flavor, seemed to hold within it layers of tradition, ambition, and maybe a little bit of mischief. But now, your mouth craves something else. Something comforting. Something soft, familiar, maybe a little sticky. And the Romans, for all their bizarre tastes, knew exactly how to indulge a sweet tooth, or soak it in olive oil until it gleamed like marble. You rise, dust your tunic off, and continue your slow meander through Rome's twilight. The alleys are narrowing now, curling like veins toward the city's quieter arteries. Up ahead, you spot the unmistakable glow of another stall, this one not surrounded by brazier smoke or bubbling pots, but by a tall stack of round, golden discs. They're slightly misshapen, glistening under a smear of oil, and stacked like lazy coins on a slab of oak. The vendor is an older woman, her arms thick with flour, her hair covered with a veil held in place by pins shaped like tiny acorns. She doesn't call out to you. She doesn't need to. The smell does the work. Warm wheat, scorched honey, a trace of toasted sesame, and a low, buttery undertone that might be animal fat or crushed almonds, it's hard to say. But it's enough. Your feet are already drifting toward her table. Your stomach, which only minutes ago was filled with vinegar beans and roasted rodent, stirs again with embarrassing eagerness. Mainstream historical fact, bread was the backbone of Roman diets, but it didn't always come plain. Many Romans, especially those grabbing food from street vendors or stalls near bathhouses, opted for panis adipitus, bread soaked or fried in animal fat. Think of it like an early, greasy focaccia. Sometimes topped with herbs, sometimes drizzled with honey, always better when hot. If you're picturing a flat slab of oily deliciousness with slightly crispy edges and a chewy middle, you're not far off. You nod at the woman, place 2 coins gently in the bowl beside her, and she hands you a piece of what looks like a small, round bread fried in lard and brushed with melted honey. It's warm. Too warm to bite just yet. But you cradle it between your hands like a soft stone, its weight satisfying, its scent hypnotic. There's a second tray nearby, piled high with little hexagonal cakes, browned on the bottom and glistening on top with a layer of candied fig paste. She sees your glance, cracks the faintest smile, and adds one to your napkin without asking. A gift. Or maybe a test. Fringe tidbit. Roman bakers often shaped their sweets to resemble sacred objects. Honey cakes were sometimes pressed into molds shaped like temple columns, pine cones, or the face of a god. One surviving mold shows a grinning satyr, possibly the world's oldest food-themed practical joke. In some temples, these cakes were used as offerings, left on altars or burned slightly as part of a ritual. But here on the street, they're just dessert. You bite into the oily bread first. It gives way easily, crackling at the edges, soft at the center. It tastes like fried olive oil and wheat, but not just that. There's a tiny hit of coriander somewhere in there, a surprise that tickles the back of your tongue. The honey hasn't been brushed on so much as soaked in. Your fingers gleam under the lamplight, and you don't care. You lean against the wooden post beside the stall, chewing slowly, and listen to the soft murmur of others doing the same. A pair of teenage boys share a loaf between them, tearing it into greasy curls. A woman in a woolen shawl wipes a crumb from her toddler's cheek. A man with a soldier's gait tosses a honey cake into his mouth hole and doesn't even slow his step. You unwrap the second treat, the hexagonal cake, and take a bite. This one is more complex. The bottom is dense, almost grainy, but the top is sticky sweet, with a depth that comes not from sugar but from boiled figs, maybe even fermented dates. It's not overly sweet, at least not by modern standards, but rich. The kind of richness that sneaks up slowly, like sleep. You chew slower now. The warmth from the bread and the weight of the cake begin to settle into you, not heavily, but calmly, like a familiar blanket over your shoulders. You close your eyes for just a second, the world around you blurring into the soft sound of sandals on stone, of quiet laughter, of oil crackling on hot iron. Now here's where the scholars get fussy. Historians still argue about how common these sweet breads and honey cakes really were. Some say they were limited to elite feasts or seasonal festivals. Others point to inscriptions and marketplace graffiti that suggest even the most modest vendors sold some version of these treats, coarser maybe, or smaller, but no less loved. Archaeological digs have turned up carbonized loaves near bakeries, complete with honey residue and trace spices. Was this food for the gods, or for the everyman? As usual in Rome, the line blurs. You finish the cake in 3 slow bites, licking your thumb instinctively. The vendor hands you a damp cloth without a word. You nod in thanks. It smells faintly of lavender and something sharp, maybe vinegar. Even the napkins here are scented. You watch for a moment as she turns back to her stack, adjusting the loaves, pressing down on a new batch with the heel of her hand. It's not glamorous work, but there's a rhythm to it: press, turn, fold, fry. A choreography passed down not through books, but through flour-covered hands. A recipe you feel more than read. You take a final look at the cakes. One has a small crack through it, where the syrup has pooled and crystallized. Another bears a faint imprint of what might be a grapevine or a lotus flower, delicate, half-worn by the baking process. None are perfect. But all are warm. You turn from the stall and keep walking, following the gentle downward curve of the alley. The sounds of the city are growing softer now, as the shops begin to close their shutters. A few children dart past you with flat loaves wrapped in cloth. Someone hums a lullaby from a balcony above. You run a finger along the inside of your sleeve, where a drop of honey has landed and hardened. It peels off like amber, glinting under the street lamp. And for a brief moment, you think of every person across the centuries who ever stood exactly where you're standing, wiping sticky fingers on wool and chewing something sweet, something fried, something forgettable to history, but unforgettable to the stomach. Because for all its cruelty and grandeur, its politics and pageantry, Rome was also full of these moments, quiet, greasy, golden little moments. Moments that didn't make it into scrolls or speeches but lingered instead in the corners of mouths and the folds of napkins. You pass a bakery just closing for the night. The shutters groan. The coals inside glow faintly red. The scent of flour still hangs in the doorway. You take a long breath. You're not full, not really. But you're something better, content. And the night is still young. You walk on, belly coated in oil and honey, mind softened by warmth and flour, as the street spills you gently into a wider space, a square tucked between buildings, just crooked enough to feel forgotten by the architects, and just alive enough to feel like the beating heart of something communal. The light here is dimmer, flickering from lanterns that hang from chipped plaster walls. Their glow spreads like butter across worn stones and deep cart tracks. You hear voices, low, constant, overlapping, a tapestry of tongues, trades, and temperaments. And everywhere, food. This isn't a forum or a marketplace, not in the official sense. But you've stumbled into one of Rome's many informal gathering points. A kind of accidental plaza that, over time, has become a destination for the city's best portable meals. A cluster of carts, trays, folding tables, stools, baskets, and braziers, nestled together not by design, but by habit. If you squint a little, and maybe tune your ears to the modern world, you might call it a food court. Rome's first one. You don't stop walking, but you slow to a drift. To your left, a girl ladles lentils into bowls made from hollowed bread. The broth steams up, catching the scent of crushed garlic and wild herbs. Next to her, a man in a deep blue tunic slices cured sausage into thin coins, arranging them neatly beside wedges of cheese and pickled onions. Further still, a boy no older than 10 is selling skewers of olives wrapped in vine leaves and soaked in vinegar. They glisten like beetles under the torchlight. Mainstream historical fact: while Rome had designated markets for grain, meat, and fish, much of the everyday eating happened in places like this, makeshift, familiar, rooted in routine rather than urban planning. These unofficial hubs popped up near bathhouses, theaters, and apartment blocks, filling the gap between hunger and access. Street food wasn't just convenient. It was infrastructure. Without it, the city would have starved. You step aside as a man passes you carrying 5 small plates stacked like tiles, each one trembling with its own saucy burden. He shouts something over his shoulder, probably a name, and disappears into the alley beyond. The energy here is gentle but humming. There's no shouting, no barked sales pitches. Just the quiet ritual of preparation and exchange. Some of these vendors have likely stood in this same spot for years. Maybe decades. Their tools are worn. Their hands move without thought. A sprinkle here, a slice there. It's choreography. Fringe detail. Some of these impromptu food hubs even had signature dishes, known across neighborhoods not by name, but by location. The barley mash from the corner behind the cistern. The pepperfish stew 2 stalls past the shoemaker. Food was identified by where you got it, not what it was. There were no menus, no chalkboards. Just memory and mouthfeel. A vendor waves you closer. Her tray is filled with what looks like tiny flatbreads topped with mashed beans, grated cheese, and, yes, what might be chopped hard-boiled egg. She gestures toward them with her elbow, both hands busy molding dough for the next batch. You raise a brow, curious. She nods once, sharp and proud. You don't need a pitch. You need a coin. You buy one. It's soft in the center and crisp around the rim. The beans are rich, spiced with something peppery and slightly sour. The cheese is sharp. The egg is dry but earthy. It's not a meal. It's a bite. A perfect bite. One you eat standing, quickly, with the steam rising into your lashes. Behind you, someone's grilling dried figs over charcoal. Next to them, a woman pours warm milk into clay cups, flavoring each with a different syrup, one with honey, one with date paste, and one with a hint of poppy. You watch as 3 boys argue over which is which, then swap their cups in resigned silence and drink. Here's where scholars argue. Was this kind of communal snacking truly embraced, or was it simply tolerated? Ancient writers, especially the wealthy ones, often turned their noses up at this kind of food. They called it coarse, base, unhealthy. Yet it thrived. The popularity of these informal food zones suggests that despite the sneers of elites, people didn't just rely on street food, they loved it. Some historians now wonder if our surviving literature tells us more about social snobbery than dietary norms. You wander deeper into the square, past a booth selling fish cakes that steam gently in clay trays, and another offering roasted garlic bulbs served with thin slices of barley bread. At one corner, a small line has formed in front of a wine cellar, who's ladling out sweet mulsum into low, round cups. The wine glows like syrup, thick with honey and aged in clay jugs so stained they look dipped in ash. You take a cup. It's warm, almost hot, and the sweetness is mellowed by a bite of herbs. Maybe thyme, maybe wormwood. The warmth slides down your throat, warming your belly again, but differently now. No longer the sharp edge of vinegar and spice, but something softer. Like candlelight in your ribs. A boy walks past you with a steaming cloth bundle clutched to his chest. You smell cheese and fried herbs. Someone nearby is roasting chickpeas in a shallow metal pan, the crackle almost musical. Elsewhere, a woman squats beside a fire, turning a wheel of barley dough over coals, the surface puffing gently with each turn. It's not just the food. It's the rhythm. The murmur of conversation, the clink of cups, the squeak of sandals. No one hurries here. Even the dogs move slowly, sniffing, pausing, resting in doorways as if they too have earned this peace. You lean against a column, its base polished smooth by countless shoulders, and sip the last of your wine. You watch as a man and woman share a single fig, tearing it apart with practiced, gentle hands. A child with cheeks sticky from date syrup chews while spinning in lazy circles. A vendor with flour on his nose wipes his brow and leans against his own cart, exhausted but smiling. You rinse your fingers in a trickling fountain set into the wall. The water is cool, tinged with iron and limestone. You splash a bit on your neck. It wakes you just slightly, but not too much. The kind of alertness that softens the edges of your thoughts rather than sharpening them. You realize you haven't spoken a word in a while. And you don't need to. This place asks nothing of you but your senses. Your attention. Your willingness to chew slowly and notice. And that, somehow, feels more Roman than all the sculptures and scrolls in the world. Because this is where the empire truly lived, not in speeches, but in moments. In shared bread. In whispered jokes. In fig syrup on the fingers and oil pooled in a clay bowl. In the silent agreement that something doesn't need to be grand to be good. It just needs to be warm, and shared, and real. A final breeze drifts through the square, carrying with it a whiff of burned flour and old wine. A nearby vendor lowers his lantern, wrapping the last of his goods in linen. You watch as others begin the slow process of packing up. Not hurried. Not reluctant. Just steady. Predictable. Like dusk. Like digestion. You step back into the alley from which you came, leaving behind the low hum of Rome's first food court. Your fingers still smell faintly of cheese and pepper. Your lips taste like herbs. And your heart feels a little fuller than it did an hour ago. Not because you feasted. But because you grazed, softly, slowly, like the city itself. As you return to the quieter stretch of cobblestone just beyond the square, a change settles over the city. The breeze shifts. The noise fades. The cooking fires are lower now, crackling softly beneath their earthen lids. Rome is winding down, but your senses are still sharp, still alert to every trace of smell and sound. And that's when you catch it. That sharp, tangy, unmistakably ancient aroma drifting down from somewhere just ahead. It smells like salt, like something fermented, like the ocean left out in the sun just a little too long. It smells like garum. You flinch slightly. You were warned about this. Garum isn't so much an ingredient as it is a presence, a pungent, powerful fish sauce that the Romans poured onto just about everything. It was made by layering fish guts, salt, herbs, and sometimes whole fish in massive clay vats, then leaving the mixture to ferment under the sun for months. Sometimes up to a year. The result? A thin, amber liquid, salty and savory beyond belief, used to flavor stews, meats, bread, cheese, and even fruit. Yes. Fruit. Mainstream historical fact, garum was everywhere in the Roman world. It wasn't a fringe condiment or an acquired taste, it was a culinary backbone. Factories lined the coasts of Hispania and North Africa, churning out amphora after amphora. It was so valuable that garum merchants, garumarii, became wealthy enough to fund public works and slap their names on buildings. If olive oil was Rome's butter, garum was its soy sauce, its ketchup, its secret weapon. And it had grades. The highest quality, called garum sociorum, came from mackerel, gently aged in fine salt and stored in sealed amphorae. It was used sparingly, like perfume. The lowest grade, alec, was thicker, darker, made from the dregs, and usually fed to slaves or animals. Most people fell somewhere in between. You round a corner and see a vendor tending a shallow clay basin set into a stone table. Steam curls upward from a thick stew as he dips a ladle into a bottle of garum and lets a thin stream drizzle across the surface. The smell blooms immediately, sharp, sour, slightly sweet. He stirs, tastes, nods, and adds more. You approach, curious. He raises a bowl toward you, a thick soup of lentils and barley, with leeks, garlic, and a swirl of crushed pepper floating on top. He lifts the garum again, offering a question with his eyebrows. You nod, uncertain. He adds it. Fringe tidbit. The highest-end garum was sometimes aged in sealed glass bottles, and archaeologists have found entire garum shops preserved under ash in Pompeii, complete with price lists etched into the walls. Some jars were even branded, literally marked with a manufacturer's symbol, like ancient luxury goods. One factory near modern-day Cadiz produced a garum so famous it was exported to Rome, Gaul, and Egypt. Think of it as the Roman version of champagne or designer olive oil. You sit with your bowl on a low bench nearby, sipping slowly. At first, the taste is confusing, too much salt, too much tang, but as your mouth adjusts, the layers unfold. Beneath the fishiness is something earthy. Umami, though Romans wouldn't have known that word. The garum doesn't overpower, it amplifies. Everything tastes warmer. Fuller. As though it's been translated into a richer language. Still, it's not for the faint of heart. You watch the vendor pour garum into another dish, this time over a handful of cooked cabbage and chickpeas. The woman receiving it doesn't blink. She eats slowly, dipping her spoon and sucking the edge of it as if tasting the memory of her own childhood. You realize that for many Romans, this wasn't just food. It was nostalgia. The flavor of home. Scholars continue to argue about just how widespread garum use really was. Ancient recipes call for it constantly, but were those texts meant for everyday cooks, or for the wealthy elite? Some claim the poor couldn't afford it, that they relied on simpler seasonings like vinegar and herbs. Others point to archaeological evidence, garum residue on humble bowls, amphora fragments in slums, and insist that even the lowest classes had some form of it, even if it was diluted or homemade. You glance at the other patrons nearby. A carpenter in dusty robes dunks a crust of bread into his stew. A young woman with braids coiled like ropes eats slowly from her bowl, tilting it gently to catch the last of the broth. No one is grimacing. No one looks shocked. This is food as they know it. Sharp. Satisfying. Savory in a way that doesn't just fill the stomach, it sticks in the memory. You finish your meal and return the bowl with a quiet nod. The vendor smiles. Your fingers still smell like it. The fish. The salt. The memory of the sea, pressed into every crease of your skin. And you realize that this wasn't just seasoning. It was a system. An entire industry. Whole fleets fished for garum. Slaves stirred it. Potters shaped its vessels. Traders sailed it across seas. It flavored not just food, but trade, wealth, class. A sauce so strange and specific, yet so universal, that it tells you more about Rome than any poem or coin. You walk past another vendor who's selling only condiments. Pots of mustard, dishes of crushed herbs, pastes of garlic and salt. But always, always, garum in the center. In a squat bottle sealed with wax and rope. He lets a drop fall on a sliver of pear and offers it to a man in a faded toga. The man eats it thoughtfully. Nods. Drops a coin. Walks on. Yes. On fruit. You wonder what else it touched. Steamed shellfish. Roasted goat. Even cheese. Some surviving recipes paired garum with honey and vinegar to make a kind of sweet and sour glaze. Some used it in wine. Some even drizzled it on desserts. You walk further down the alley and find a small fountain carved with fish, its basin filled with trickling water that smells faintly briny, maybe from amphorae rinsed nearby. A cat is curled beside it, sleeping. A basket of bread sits abandoned beside the door. And beside the basket, an open amphora. You peer in. It's nearly empty. At the bottom, a thin slick of brownish gold shimmers in the lamplight. The last of the garum. Dried slightly at the edges. Still potent. You imagine the person who opened this jar. Maybe yesterday. Maybe a week ago. They would have tipped it with care. Measured, maybe. Or not. Maybe they poured too much. Maybe it splashed onto the table. Onto their hands. Into the creases of their bread. Maybe they laughed. Maybe they cried. Maybe they didn't think about it at all. Because when something's in everything, you stop noticing. Until it's gone. You walk on, the tang still in your mouth, the smell still riding the edge of your breath. A man passing you carries a basket of pastries. You wonder, absurdly, curiously, if there's garum in them too. In Rome? There might be. And the strangest thing? It wouldn't surprise you anymore. The streets begin to grow quieter now, not silent, but less crowded, less hurried. You notice how each torch along the way burns lower than the last, how even the dogs have curled up beneath wooden carts and doorways, their breathing slow, steady. But not far ahead, flickering amber light dances against the walls in a familiar rhythm, something older, rougher. Not the careful sizzle of a vendor's brazier, but the wilder, open crackle of a campfire. You follow it. And before long, you step into a narrow courtyard where half a dozen men sit gathered around a low fire. Their cloaks are coarse, their boots caked with dried mud, their brows furrowed from sun and distance. These are soldiers, off duty, maybe newly returned, or just passing through on orders. A pair of swords lie across a bench, resting like tired limbs. One man sharpens a stick lazily, another fans the flames with a folded scrap of leather. But most are focused on the food, what little there is of it. A flat stone serves as a makeshift griddle. Resting on it, thin rounds of dough, browned unevenly, bubbling gently in the heat. Next to them, a dented bronze pot holds a soup of dubious consistency. Floating in the broth are lentils, cracked barley, and what might be the last shreds of dried onion. A cloth bundle nearby is tied tightly, rations for later. Hard biscuits the size of your palm, stacked like bone-dry tiles. Welcome to the quiet world of military rations, Rome's field cuisine. Mainstream historical fact, the Roman legions were one of the most efficient fighting forces in history, not just because of discipline or engineering, but because they were fed. Soldiers received daily allocations of grain, mostly wheat, sometimes meat, salt, oil, and vinegar. But they weren't served. They cooked for themselves, singly or in groups of 8, called contubernia. Together, these men would grind their grain, light their fires, and bake their own simple meals. Often in silence. Always in repetition. You sit quietly on a nearby step and watch as one man uses the edge of his knife to flip a flatbread. It tears slightly, but the smell rising off it is warm and nutty, flour, ash, maybe a trace of olive oil if they were lucky. Another pulls out a biscuit from the bundle and cracks it in half with a wince. It echoes like a stone. One soldier takes a bite and chews slowly, eyes half-lidded. Not out of bliss, but endurance. Fringe detail. These biscuits, called buxalatum, were baked until nearly indestructible, meant to last months without molding. They were so hard that some soldiers softened them in vinegar before eating, or dunked them into the stew like edible rocks. Roman vinegar, or paska, was a soldier's common drink, wine gone sour, watered down, often mixed with herbs. Cheap. Sharp. Reviving. A ladle is passed around. No one rushes. A few toss in broken bits of bread, watching it soften slowly. Someone jokes softly in a dialect you don't recognize. Another man chuckles, but doesn't look up. The mood isn't festive. It's resigned. Worn. But not unhappy. There's comfort here. A routine honed on distant roads and foreign soil. You accept a piece of the flatbread when offered. It's hot, ash-dusted, and folds like cloth in your hand. The outside is crisp in places, the center chewy, almost gummy. There's no seasoning, no filling. Just flour, water, and fire. You chew slowly. And you understand something simple and profound. This is food meant not to delight, but to carry. To follow you across rivers and through forests. To stay good long after your courage wears thin. Someone pours paska into a clay mug and hands it your way. You take a cautious sip. The vinegar cuts through your mouth like a blade, sour and a little smoky, but oddly invigorating. You can taste thyme, maybe coriander. It clears your throat in the same way cold air wakes you at dawn. No frills. No sweetness. But alive. The soldiers eat in a rhythm shaped by exhaustion. One dips his bread straight into the pot. Another slices dried sausage with the same knife he used to scrape mud from his boots. One has a handful of raisins pressed into a square of cloth, the closest thing to dessert on the march. He offers you a few, and they taste like smoke and sun, still sticky despite the dust. Now here's where the debate simmers. Historians still argue how well-fed Roman soldiers truly were. Ancient records list generous rations, but archaeological digs suggest improvisation. In some regions, troops had access to game, wild greens, or local livestock. In others, especially on harsh frontiers, it was boiled grain, vinegar, and little else. Some say they feasted on pork and cheese. Others say they barely scraped by. You watch one man stir a pouch of herbs into the pot, something he likely picked himself, growing wild near the camp. A few mint leaves. A twist of fennel. It isn't much. But it changes the smell of the soup entirely. A touch of green among the brown. Someone's brought a pan of chickpeas, toasted over a metal plate. They hiss when stirred. One soldier throws a pinch of salt over them like a gambler tossing dice. Another adds a scrap of goat fat, and the whole pan lets out a single, smoky sigh. You take one when offered. It pops in your mouth. Dry, salty, soft in the center. A campfire snack. Gone in a second. The fire pops. A soldier picks a tune on a bone flute, low and without melody. Just a string of tired notes for his own company. Someone passes around a square of barley cake, dark and hard-edged, flavored faintly with anise. You break off a piece. It tastes like memory. Like distance. Like grit. Another man pulls from his pack something that glints faintly in the firelight, a small, bronze flask. He takes a sip and passes it along. It smells like fermented fruit, but it's sharp, medicinal. You feel it in your chest like a slap and a lullaby all at once. Someone coughs. Someone laughs. The fire pops again. You ask nothing. No one needs to explain. This is not the Rome of marble columns or golden statues. This is the Rome of calloused hands, of creaking joints, of unwashed cloaks and chipped bowls. Of men who marched 30 miles and still had to bake their own bread before sleep. Of food not for joy, but for endurance. And yet, there is beauty here. A kind that isn't showy or soft. The beauty of survival. Of habit. Of heat shared around a circle in the dark. You rise, slowly, nodding thanks. The men around you barely glance up. One lifts his mug. Another closes his eyes, head resting on a rolled cloak. The fire flickers lower, now just embers and rhythm. Someone tosses a bone onto the coals. It cracks like glass. The sound hangs in the dark a little too long. As you step back into the night, you carry with you the scent of smoke, vinegar, and barley. Not a feast, but a foundation. The kind of food you pack in silence. Chew without complaint. Digest without joy. And miss more than you'd expect. Because some meals don't comfort. They anchor. And Rome? Rome was built not just on conquest, but on biscuits. You move on through the hushed streets, the warmth of the soldiers' fire fading behind you, replaced by cooler air and the distant murmur of fountains. The buildings are changing now, less soot-stained, more polished. The walls are smoother, the windows larger, the doors framed in painted stucco and set farther back from the street. You've crossed some invisible line. This is no longer the Rome of soldiers and street vendors. This is the Rome of atriums and mosaics. Of oil lamps that never go out. Of slippers instead of sandals. And though it's quieter here, the smells haven't disappeared. They've just changed. Now it's rose water, burned myrrh, beeswax, and something else, something roasted, sweet, and strangely floral. You follow your nose, weaving past a marble fountain shaped like a shell, its basin filled with gently trickling water and floating petals. Behind it, a low, columned villa glows from within. Light flickers through the latticework of a private kitchen. You pause just outside the threshold, your footsteps muffled by woven reed mats. You're not exactly invited, but no one stops you either. And inside, a small team of household slaves moves like shadows, quietly preparing the final round of evening bites for their wealthy patrons. Not a banquet. Just snacks. Late-night luxuries. The kind of food you don't eat because you're hungry, but because you can. A tray of small, roasted birds, quail, or maybe sparrows, sits cooling on a slab of alabaster. Their legs are wrapped in grape leaves, and each is basted in a glaze of pomegranate syrup and pepper. Another dish holds tiny saffron buns, delicately scored and filled with pine nut paste. There's a bowl of honeyed almonds, roasted until their skins crack and glisten. And near the back, a servant is carefully spooning something thick and golden into polished glass cups. At first glance, you think it's custard, but the smell tells you otherwise. It's cheese, gently melted with honey and crushed dates, then topped with slivered figs and a sprinkle of sea salt. This is no thermopolium. This is private indulgence. Mainstream historical fact, the Roman elite had access to an astonishing variety of delicacies, both imported and local. Their snacks ranged from the familiar, stuffed dates, roasted chestnuts, fresh goat cheese, to the extravagant, flamingo tongue, sea urchin roe, peacock brains. They didn't eat like this every day, but when they did, it was theater. Even between meals, they expected something clever on the plate. Food that impressed. That entertained. A servant walks past you with a dish of what looks like tiny peaches, but they aren't peaches. They're sculpted balls of almond paste, dyed with beet juice and dusted with saffron to resemble the fruit. You watch as he carefully places them on a mosaic table where two reclining figures murmur in low Latin. The man wears a golden ring on every finger. The woman's eyes are rimmed in kohl, her nails tinted with crushed rose petals. They eat without speaking. Slowly. As if the food should not only be savored, but obeyed. Fringe detail. Some Roman hosts froze their desserts using snow brought down from the Apennines, stored in underground pits and mixed with honey or wine. Guests at especially lavish parties might be served snow-cooled melon slices in summer, or tiny jellies molded into the shapes of mythological creatures. One surviving text describes honeycomb shards suspended in wine jelly, served on glass dishes over rose petals. It wasn't about hunger. It was about spectacle. You lean slightly against a marble pillar, breathing in the room's warmth, the scent of figwood smoke curling from a low oven. Another tray is laid out, this one more savory. There are thin slices of cured fish pressed between leaves of mint. Fried cheese rolled with thyme. Olives soaked in vinegar and orange zest. A paste made of sesame, coriander, and honey sits like a jewel in the center, waiting to be scooped with delicate wafers made from rice flour and milk. You don't dare touch, but your mouth waters anyway. And your mind, still carrying the dry taste of barley biscuit from the soldier's fire, begins to drift. This, too, was Rome. The sharp contrast. The wealth of taste layered directly atop the weariness of the poor. While one man gnawed on a lump of dried bread softened in vinegar, another nibbled rose-flavored almonds from a silver dish. The same city. The same moment. Entirely different textures. Scholars still debate how much of this food was regularly consumed by the elite, and how much was saved for special occasions. Some argue that the extravagant menus in ancient texts, like those found in Apicius, were never meant to be followed precisely. They were culinary fantasies, like reading a cookbook that no one ever truly cooks from. But others say no. These dishes, bizarre as they sound, were real and expected. Especially when guests arrived. Especially when status was at stake. Another servant approaches with a long-handled dish. Inside are eggs stuffed with pine nuts, garlic, and vinegar, then lightly poached and drizzled with honey. He offers one to the reclining couple. The woman raises a single eyebrow, gestures to the wine instead. At the far end of the kitchen, a boy grinds cinnamon bark in a bronze mortar. Another stirs something pale and sticky in a pan. Honey, milk, a bit of flour. She pours it slowly onto a stone slab, flattening it into thin, translucent sheets. Candy, perhaps. Or something candied. A treat that will be broken into shards and served on the tongue like a secret. A kitchen boy sneezes softly. No one reacts. You watch the labor continue, quiet and steady. Everything choreographed. Everything clean. Even the tools are beautiful. Bronze ladles shaped like lilies, carved ivory spoons with fluted handles, platters of colored glass so delicate they tremble when set down. Nothing chipped. Nothing hurried. And you realize how much energy, how much invisible labor, goes into these snacks. Not just the ingredients or the hands that prepared them, but the idea behind them. That food should dazzle. That it should be delicate, disguised, transformed. Not eaten, but admired. Almost worshipped. You leave quietly, before the fourth tray is presented. You've seen enough. Not because it was too much, but because it was enough to understand that Rome fed not just its armies and its poor, but its vanity. Its appetite for beauty. Its hunger for control, even over flour, and figs, and fire. Outside, the air feels cooler again. The street is darker. You walk past a shadowed doorway where someone is roasting chestnuts over a low flame. He offers you one without a word. You take it. Crack it open. It's simple. Warm. Real. And somehow, exactly what you need. You walk on with it still warm in your hand, and for a moment, all of Rome softens, behind you, ahead of you, and beneath your feet. The path ahead narrows again, leading away from the elegant villas and back toward the low-slung bustle of ordinary life. The clink of silver and the quiet orchestration of elite kitchens fades into the softer rhythms of footsteps, worn wooden doors, creaking shutters, and the gentle rise and fall of people still awake, still moving. There are fewer torch brackets here. The night deepens. But another kind of glow takes over, lamplight. Faint, flickering, and stubborn, it spills from small rooms tucked behind colonnades and clay courtyards. You begin to hear the scratch of styluses. The low murmur of reading aloud. The short huff of a young voice muttering declensions under their breath. A laugh. A groan. Paper rustling. Wax tablets clicking shut. You've reached the student quarter. Not scholars in marble libraries or orators in togas, but the quieter kind. The learners. Teenagers, apprentices, scribes, the sons of shopkeepers and the daughters of retired soldiers. Young Romans hunched over scrolls and tablets, squinting by oil lamp, learning how to shape the empire through verbs and verse. And where there is study, there is snacking. It's quieter than the feasts and simpler than the street stalls. But still present. You pass a doorway left ajar, where two boys sit shoulder to shoulder, sharing a bench, their feet swinging just above the floor. Between them is a bowl of salted lupin beans, skins curled back, the air tinged with vinegar and garlic. They're memorizing something together, Ovid, maybe, and between lines, they pop beans into their mouths like punctuation. Mainstream historical fact, education in Rome was grueling and repetitive. Students began young, studying letters, then grammar, then rhetoric, often through brute memorization. Many attended private tutors or small classroom-like gatherings, and most lessons stretched long into the afternoon. Food wasn't provided. But clever students brought their own. Small, portable things they could sneak between recitations. At the base of a column, a girl leans over a slate covered in wax. Her stylus is looped through her braid. At her side sits a folded cloth bundle. She opens it. Inside, half a flatbread rubbed with olive oil, folded around shavings of hard cheese. She takes small bites without looking up, chewing while reciting lines under her breath. She doesn't notice you watching. She's too deep in the rhythm of learning. Further down, a door opens to reveal a dim room where 5 older boys huddle over a single scroll. One reads. The others lean in, noses almost touching. The reader pauses. They argue. They laugh. Then fall silent. On the floor beside them, a cracked dish holds slices of boiled egg, sprinkled with herbs and rolled in crumbs. The yolks gleam under the lamplight like tiny suns. Fringe detail. Some Roman students flavored their wax tablets with herbs, not to taste, but to keep themselves alert. Others rubbed their fingers with garlic before lessons, believing the smell helped memory. One rare note in a grammarian's diary mentions a student who chewed bay leaves while reciting, for clarity, not taste, he writes. Still, every classroom had its crumbs. At the end of the street, a bakery's back door is slightly ajar. A boy crouches near the threshold, chewing the edge of a honey biscuit that's clearly been pilfered. He hears your steps and stiffens, but you just keep walking. You understand. It's late. He's tired. And learning, like hunger, never really stops. Inside the bakery, someone stirs a pot of milk over coals. The scent drifts toward you, nutmeg, perhaps, or just sweet grain. Maybe someone's preparing breakfast for the master. Or maybe for themselves. Either way, it reminds you of how quiet and unadorned these foods are. No figs carved like doves. No fish wrapped in mint. Just warmth. Bread. Oil. The simplest of comforts. A soft thump nearby draws your gaze. A young man has fallen asleep at his table, arms crossed, head tilted slightly toward the window. His stylus still rests in his hand, the wax on his tablet smudged with thumbprints. Next to him, a shallow bowl holds 3 wrinkled dates and the stub of a cheese rind. Forgotten. Unfinished. But not unneeded. You pause under a crooked archway and sit on a low step. Somewhere above you, a student reads aloud, trying to make Latin sound like song. He doesn't quite succeed, but he keeps trying. And between each phrase, you hear it, the soft chew of a crust. A mouth working through both syllables and bread. A girl walks past with ink on her elbow and sesame seeds stuck to her lips. She carries her tablet tucked beneath one arm and a folded napkin in the other. Inside, a half-mashed fig wrapped in cabbage leaf. It leaks slightly through the cloth. She doesn't seem to mind. Here's where historians still wonder, how much snacking did Roman students really do? Some claim food was forbidden in formal classrooms, especially for the children of the elite. Others point to letters and minor commentaries full of crumbs, references to quick bites during breaks, scribes with nut-stained fingers, ink jars pushed aside for dried apricots. There are even graffiti drawings of boys eating while copying scrolls, one hand holding a stylus, the other a roasted chestnut. Maybe it wasn't encouraged. But it happened. And tonight, it's happening all around you. You see it in the waxy fingerprints on bread. The peppery smell of lupin skins in the dust. The faint stickiness of honey in the pages of a worn scroll. These aren't feasts. These aren't meals. These are stolen, quiet bites. Things tucked between verbs. Slipped between pages. Small, edible pauses in the work of becoming someone new. Somewhere nearby, a teacher clears his throat. A brief hush falls. You hear chalk tapping against wood, then the low drone of a lesson resuming. A line of Cicero, maybe. Or something harsher. But not everyone listens. A girl in the back reaches for a cloth pouch tied to her belt. She pulls out a dried fig, soft from body heat. She presses it to her lips like a secret. And then, wordlessly, she offers it to the boy beside her. You watch him smile without looking at her. This, too, is Rome. Not the one of emperors or arenas. But one of elbows pressed together in cramped rooms. Of tired voices reading late into the night. Of flour-dusted hands and wax-stained scrolls. Of teachers and learners. Of hunger for food, and for words. You walk farther, past a set of steps worn smooth by sandals. A sleeping dog lifts its head and watches you pass, then drops it again with a sigh. Behind a half-open shutter, a small girl hums a tune you don't recognize, the rhythm punctuated by the crunch of something hard, maybe a walnut or the brittle end of a bread crust. Somewhere above, someone's hand knocks over a lamp. You hear the soft thud of a body scrambling, the whispered curse, the hiss of spilled oil. No fire starts. Just a nervous laugh. And the scratching of a stylus starts again. You walk on, and Rome seems quieter now. Or maybe you're just hearing more than before. Because in this corner of the empire, even the crumbs speak Latin. The city isn't asleep yet. Not entirely. As you follow the winding street away from the hush of study halls and wax-scented courtyards, something in the air changes again. There's a rhythm now, a pulse. It's faint at first, almost imaginary, like the ghost of applause echoing from some stone amphitheater miles away. But with each step, it grows louder. Brighter. The alley opens, and suddenly you're no longer alone. A banner flutters overhead, red and gold and frayed at the corners. Someone's draped it across a wooden beam where lanterns hang like sagging stars. Below, a crowd murmurs, laughs, bumps shoulders. You've stepped into a side market, a temporary, night-blooming pop-up of Rome's festival underbelly. The stalls aren't permanent. The tents are canvas. The vendors shout not from behind stone counters but from crates, barrels, and makeshift carts with rope wheels. Smoke curls up from clay braziers. Bells jingle. A girl dances in place to the rhythm of a hand drum, a stick of honeyed almonds clutched in one hand. This isn't Saturnalia proper, it's not the official parade or the sacrifices, not the recitations or the formal temple rites, but it is Saturnalia adjacent. The kind of celebration that seeps into every Roman street whether invited or not. A night of reversal, laughter, and food, lots of food. A boy darts past you, grinning, his hands smeared with something orange and greasy. Behind him, a vendor ladles hot spiced lentils into tiny bowls made of pressed fig leaves. Next door, an old woman pulls sticky buns from a pan sizzling in olive oil, rolls them quickly in crushed sesame, and tosses them onto a tray lined with laurel leaves. She catches you looking and winks. Mainstream historical fact, Roman festivals, especially Saturnalia, Floralia, and Lupercalia, were known for their excess. While elites entertained guests with roast boar and sweet wine, the streets filled with temporary stalls offering warm finger foods, spiced snacks, fried sweets, and regional specialties brought in by vendors from the countryside. Rules relaxed. Class distinctions blurred. And for a few days, gluttony was encouraged. You pass a man selling slices of boiled squash glazed with vinegar and sprinkled with poppy seeds. It's tucked neatly into palm leaf wrappers, meant to be eaten while walking. Someone else hands out hot dates stuffed with crushed almonds and fried in sheep fat. The smell shouldn't work. And yet, it does. A passing breeze carries the sweetness straight into your chest. You blink slowly, drunk on warmth and air. Fringe detail. During certain festivals, vendors sold candy garlands, twine threaded with dried figs, hazelnuts, and candied orange peel. Children wore them like necklaces and bit into them through the night. Others carried roasted chickpeas in folded parchment, eating one at each temple they passed. A few aristocratic houses even hired performers to juggle with candied apples, throwing them into the crowd when the performance ended. A pair of boys try to balance figs on their foreheads while juggling walnuts. A woman nearby dips fried dough into a mixture of honey and wine, then shakes it to cool before handing it to a customer. You sidestep a puddle of spilled sauce that glows gold under the lanterns. A group of musicians begins to play, slow at first, with hollow wooden pipes and jingling ankle bells, but it grows bolder as the crowd swells. The rhythm is simple, almost hypnotic. Your foot taps without permission. Everyone's feet do. You're handed something warm, pressed into your palm by a man with flower-streaked sleeves. You don't ask what it is. You bite. It's dense, earthy, faintly bitter, like ground chickpeas and coriander. Then sweet, just a brush of dried fruit. The flavor lingers and then fades, like laughter after someone's already turned the corner. Scholars still argue whether these food stalls were run by traveling vendors or local residents repurposing their homes for quick profit. Some believe entire families took the opportunity to sell baked goods from their kitchens during festivals. Others suggest a more organized underground economy, semi-professional cooks, farmers, and seasonal sellers who follow the calendar from market to market. Whatever the truth, the result was unmistakable: food everywhere. A child tugs at your sleeve and offers you a ball of something round, sticky, and lumpy. Eat, they ask in broken Greek Latin. You nod. The texture is strange, like barley, dates, and dried apple pressed into a sphere and rolled in flour. It's sweet, chewy, and unexpectedly nutty. The child beams and disappears into the crowd. At the edge of the square, a fire roars in a raised brazier. A man flips chickpea fritters with a flat wooden paddle. The oil hisses, and the scent, earthy, peppery, just slightly burnt, makes you realize how long it's been since your last proper meal. A line forms quickly. Everyone speaking at once. A woman in a flower crown laughs too loudly. A boy with a cracked sandal sings off-key. A man wearing half a toga tries to barter with honey instead of coin. No one minds. It's festival night. Things don't have to make sense. You press forward and accept a fritter wrapped in grape leaf. It's still steaming. You take a bite, crispy edge, soft center, a spike of cumin, and your knees almost buckle. You sit on the edge of a stone planter, surrounded by strangers in celebration, and for a few heartbeats, you forget this is history. It feels alive. Too real to be ancient. You notice a group of older women sitting on cushions, gossiping loudly over roasted pine nuts and tiny clay cups of diluted wine. They laugh with abandon, tossing shells to the ground. One of them pulls a string of dried apples from her sleeve and shares it with a child who climbs into her lap. You wonder if she's a grandmother, a vendor, or just a stranger drawn in by the noise. Near a doorway, a man is carving curls from a block of goat cheese, pressing each one onto hard bread smeared with fake jam. He doesn't sell them. He just leaves them on a table, and passers-by take one. No money changes hands. Just bread, cheese, and a smile. The drums pick up speed. Someone's dancing with a basket of flatbreads on their head. A dog runs by, yapping with joy, a string of sausages dragging behind him. A tiny child chases him, giggling so hard they fall to the ground and roll, belly up, squealing. You close your eyes and let it all wash over you, the clamor, the smells, the food, the chaos, the joy. And in that tangle of taste and night air, you feel something soft stir in your chest. A strange sweetness, not from honey or candied fennel, but from witnessing people, just people. Doing what they've always done. Finding excuses to celebrate. Finding comfort in snacks. Finding each other. You stay until the firewood burns low. Until the music softens and the crowd thins. Until the sticky oil on your fingertips is dry and the last bite of fritter cools in your palm. You stand. You walk. You look back once, just to see the lantern sway. And when you turn the corner, the festival continues, but quieter now. Like a dream fading behind a curtain. It's quiet now, but not the kind of quiet that means stillness. It's the kind that hums just beneath the surface, like a whisper being passed from room to room, from port to market, from ship to street. You feel it before you see it, the subtle shift in the air, the faintest scent of something unfamiliar and sweet. A curl of resin. A trickle of citrus. A kind of perfume that doesn't belong to Rome alone. You follow your nose down a narrower alley, and suddenly the city feels foreign again. Not Roman. Not entirely. And that's precisely the point. Here is where the empire gathers what it doesn't produce itself. The stalls are lower here. The awnings a little brighter. Someone has painted blue stripes along the wooden beams. A copper wind chime turns gently in the breeze. And every surface seems piled high with things that shimmer faintly in the sun. You're at a market within a market. A quieter one, tucked away from the wine cellars and the fritter carts, where Rome's imported delicacies wait in open baskets and sealed amphorae, as though reluctant to speak but impossible to ignore. A boy sits cross-legged on a crate, peeling slivers of dried mango with a shell. His hands are stained yellow. His eyes don't leave your face as he offers you a thin piece. You chew slowly. It's sweet, but also sharp, like honey soaked in sunlight and left to ferment slightly in a clay jar. You ask where it's from, and he shrugs. Far, he says, pointing toward the sea. You nod. That seems to cover it. Mainstream historical fact, Rome was an empire built not only on conquest but on appetite. Its reach extended from Britain to Mesopotamia, and its supply chain stretched even farther. Spices from India, incense from Arabia, pepper from the Malabar coast, dates from Judea, sesame from Africa, and cinnamon from Ceylon all made their way into Roman hands. At a cost, yes, but at a frequency that surprises modern scholars. These weren't mere luxuries for emperors. They trickled downward, slowly, into the kitchens of the curious and the pockets of the modestly ambitious. You pass a crate of what look like tiny figs, wrinkled and golden brown, pressed into cakes and tied with reeds. Next to them, something stranger, bitter orange peels candied in thick syrup and left to harden into glistening curls. You bite one. It resists your teeth for a moment, then surrenders completely. Sweet, bitter, and warm all at once. Like memory on your tongue. To your left, a woman arranges a neat spiral of saffron threads inside a shallow dish. They're no thicker than eyelashes, but their scent hits you hard, floral and metallic, with the faintest echo of hay. She picks up a single thread with a curved needle and offers it to you without smiling. Add it to milk, she murmurs. Just a drop. You nod, pocket it carefully, though you doubt you'll ever use it. It feels too rare to consume. Too golden to waste. Fringe tidbit. A few wealthier Roman households kept spice safes, tiny lockable cabinets built into kitchen walls, where saffron, cardamom, and long pepper were stored under seal, like treasure. Servants weren't permitted to open them. Cooks could request a pinch, a spoonful, maybe two, nothing more. One inscription discovered in a villa near Herculaneum reads, "To open this box without my hand is theft and shame." It was etched into stone. You wander further, deeper into the goods that smell like rain in deserts you'll never see. A small pot of asafoetida paste makes your eyes water. A basket of dried lotus seeds cracks faintly as you pass. Someone is selling cubes of tamarind resin wrapped in palm husks. Another offers a spoonful of black salt mixed with something sulfurous and sweet, odd, pungent, impossible to describe. He calls it Egypt's ghost. The deeper you go, the more the line between food and medicine blurs. A thin old man is grinding dried ginger into powder. Beside him, licorice root curls like sleeping snakes. Another vendor pulls back a cloth to reveal candied olives, green, pitted, dipped in sugar and sun-dried until they gleam like dark glass. You take one, bite in. It's earthy and wrong at first, but then it softens, and something almost floral blooms behind your teeth. Historians still argue over just how accessible these foreign imports were. One school claims they were status symbols, used more for display than taste. A merchant might sprinkle a few grains of exotic spice over a dull stew just to impress a dinner guest. Others argue that the sheer volume of surviving amphorae suggests a broader market, that dock workers, bakers, even soldiers developed preferences for distant flavors and sought them out in small, affordable quantities. There are even preserved receipts showing pepper sold by the handful, like a pinch of salt. A teenager shouts from the back of the stall, holding up a small glazed plate, figs from Carthage stuffed with crushed walnuts and sesame paste. They're warm, sweet, and nutty, and dusted with a fine white powder that might be sugar, or perhaps powdered date stone, ground so fine it clings like flour. You buy one. Then two. Then three. The vendor laughs and throws in a fourth, for the gods. You nod solemnly. The gods, after all, are always hungry. You pause to sip from a clay cup filled with something called defrutum, a reduction of grape must, thick and dark like syrup, aged in clay. It tastes like wine without the sharpness, and molasses without the weight. You swallow slowly and wonder how far this flavor has traveled to reach you. Not just miles, but centuries. Perhaps longer. A donkey cart rattles past, piled high with pomegranates, their skins cracked open by the sun, revealing glistening seeds like tiny rubies. The driver is singing a lullaby in a language you don't recognize. You hum along anyway. Something about the rhythm feels ancient and familiar. As you round the last corner of this alleyway market, you spot a peculiar shelf stacked with small, rectangular tins. Inside are preserved rose petals, crystallized and perfumed. Next to them, dried slices of citron, preserved in honey. And behind that, even stranger, small jars filled with violet jelly, capped in wax, and labeled in faded ink. You run your fingers across the lids, feeling the softness of dust. One final detail catches your eye. A glass vial filled with something dark and thick, sealed with a plug of wax and cloth. You ask what it is. The woman behind the table raises an eyebrow. Garum di Phoenicia, she says. Imported. Old. Sweet. Rotten. Perfect. She winks. You'll hate it. You don't buy it. But you smile. And for a moment, you feel strangely at home among all these alien things. These objects that crossed deserts and rivers, mountains and wars, just to end up in someone's pocket. In someone's mouth. In a cook's mortar. In a child's lunch. As you step back out into the quieter street, the flavors seem to cling to you. A little spice in your throat. A little sugar on your fingertips. You've tasted the edge of empire, and it wasn't made of swords. It was made of mango. Of saffron. Of date syrup and wine skins and fig leaf wrapped candies. The wind picks up, and the hanging chimes sing a brittle song. You take one last look over your shoulder. This time, you don't see Rome. You see the world. You've wandered through markets and feast days, student quarters and spice stalls, letting flavor guide your steps. But now, the path pulls you somewhere quieter, more mechanical. Less about ingredients, and more about how the magic happened. You find yourself beneath an archway where the air smells of iron, wood smoke, and a ghost of old oil, like the inside of a well-used pan. There's no music here. No shouting vendors. Just the clink of metal, the scuff of sandals, and the soft sound of preparation. This is Rome's beating culinary heart, the kitchen. Or rather, the tools of the kitchen. Mainstream historical fact. Roman cooks had far more gear than most people imagine. Forget the image of a crude hearth and a stick. Wealthy Roman households, and even many taverns, boasted a surprising array of gadgets: colanders, cheese graters, slotted spoons, tongs, clay ovens, bronze frying pans, gridirons, and specialized molds for cakes and confections. Some kitchens even had portable stoves that could be taken on picnics or moved to balconies. You duck into a semi-covered space, where fire has blackened the brick above a sunken hearth. The triclinium diners you saw earlier might have waited for slaves to bring their food. But here, in this tucked-away world, the cooks reign supreme. Bronze pans hang from hooks like shields. Clay pots line a low shelf, each carefully labeled with crude symbols scratched into the side: lentils, fish paste, honey, spelt. Everything has its place. A woman sharpens a long two-pronged fork against a stone. Sparks bloom briefly in the dark. Nearby, another cook kneels beside a portable brazier, coaxing a shallow fire with a bellows carved from goat hide. Above it, a domed iron pan heats slowly. You can hear the oil whisper. There's a tool on the table beside them you don't recognize, something between a pasta cutter and a rolling pin, its edges scalloped, its handle bone white. The cook uses it to score dough with practiced hands, shaping circles to be fried later into crispy wafers glazed in date syrup. A ladle clinks into a deep copper pot. You hear something simmering, slow, thick bubbles, like a sleepy mud spring. The smell? Garlic, vinegar, herbs, and something smoky. Maybe lentils. Maybe fava beans. Maybe both. One pot always holds a surprise. Fringe detail. Roman archaeologists have uncovered curious kitchen tools whose exact function is still unknown. One bronze object discovered in Pompeii has evenly spaced teeth and a hollow handle. Some believe it was for stripping herbs. Others think it was an early version of a ravioli press. And still others argue it might have been a fish scaler. No consensus yet, only guesses wrapped in grease stains and time. Behind you, something thumps, then hisses. A flat pan, rimmed in iron, is being used to shallow fry small pastries. The batter, once poured, forms perfect circles. The cook tilts the pan with a piece of cloth to keep the oil moving. It smells like sesame, like almond, like dough that will melt in your mouth before your teeth remember to chew. The walls here are sooty. The air warm and close. But not chaotic. There's rhythm in the movement. A kind of culinary choreography. One cook pours, another flips, a third grinds dried olives into paste using a stone bowl and a wooden pestle. She hums as she works. You recognize the tune, it's the same melody you heard a child humming at the scribal quarter. Recipes may not have traveled far, but songs did. And the tools weren't just for frying or boiling. Over a small bench, a series of molds line the shelf. Some are shaped like fish. Others like flowers, pine cones, even a tiny peacock. These were used for libum, a kind of cheesecake offering, sometimes soaked in honey and stamped into decorative forms. Nearby, a square press, weighted with stone, squeezes herbs between leaves. The result? A paste used to season oils, or spread on bread like a rustic tapenade. Someone opens a chest to reveal wooden rolling pins, delicate clay ramekins, copper skewers, miniature mortars carved from limestone, and a basket of sieve cloths made from tightly woven goat hair. You run your fingers across them gently. They feel like something between magic and routine. Historians still debate the extent of kitchen innovation in common Roman homes. Were these gadgets widespread, or limited to elite villas and inns? Some believe traveling vendors carried collapsible cooking sets, bronze stands, iron spits, folding skewers, for street-side frying. Others argue most Romans relied on shared kitchens or communal bread ovens, especially in crowded apartment blocks, where fire was too dangerous to risk indoors. The bread oven, in fact, is the largest structure in the room. Dome-shaped. Clay-lined. Charcoal still glows faintly near its open mouth. A man with soot on his face pulls out a loaf using a paddle so long it might double as an oar. He taps the bottom of the bread. It makes a sound like a hollow drum. Perfect. He doesn't speak. He just nods once and moves to the next. You notice a clay pot hanging near the back wall, suspended over embers. Its lid is sealed with dough. The cook tells you it's pulmentum, a porridge of farro and onions with a bit of garum and aged cheese. Tastes better with ash, he jokes, winking. Then he lifts the lid to check it, breaking the seal with a puff of steam. The smell is strong but oddly comforting, like something your grandmother might have made if your grandmother happened to live in a Roman insula. In the far corner, a simple gadget sits idle, two flat iron plates joined by a hinge, their edges crusted with old oil and ash. It's a sandwich press, more or less. Roman cooks used it to crisp flatbreads, or even to make early versions of stuffed pastries. Honey, cheese, and nuts folded into dough, then pressed until golden. It's strange how close it feels to a modern waffle iron. Almost familiar. A cat sneaks in through a low window and curls around the base of a spice chest. No one shoos it away. It clearly lives here. Maybe it even knows the cooking schedule better than the cooks themselves. You stand near the door, watching a young girl pour beaten egg into tiny clay cups. She sprinkles them with crushed nuts and honey, then sets them into a small oven that's been heated with grapevine trimmings. You ask what they're making. She shrugs. For the children, she says. Or maybe the gods. She smiles like she doesn't see much difference between the two. And maybe she's right. Because in this small, glowing kitchen, filled with the click of metal, the sigh of steam, and the quiet dance of hands that know exactly what they're doing, it does feel a little divine. The tools aren't just tools. They're extensions of memory, culture, and care. They don't just cook. They translate ingredients into stories. They bridge regions, rituals, and generations. And as the scent of caramelized honey and toasted grain floats upward, you realize you've walked through the mouth of an empire, not just through what it ate, but how it made eating feel sacred, communal, ordinary, and miraculous all at once. You've seen so much food by now: fritters, mice, saffron threads, goat cheese pastries, wine reductions, and sticky sweet dates, that you'd be forgiven for assuming that all Romans lived in a kind of endless banquet. Greasy fingers, stuffed bellies, reclining men plucking grapes from silver trays, someone playing a lyre in the background, it's the image that survived most vividly. But like all enduring myths, it conceals more than it reveals. And tonight, you're going to walk straight into that myth, poke at it a bit, run your fingers along its gold-plated edges, and see what lies beneath the surface of the so-called convivium. The alley you're in now is noticeably different. Quieter. Narrower. The marble facades are gone. Here, the homes are simpler, their doors open to the street, their walls faded and uneven. Somewhere behind one of them, you hear the clatter of pottery and a woman laughing in short bursts. It smells like bread. Not the soft white loaves of patrician kitchens, but the dense, chewy kind baked in communal ovens with coarse flour and the occasional rock still hiding inside. Your feet crunch on bits of charcoal swept into the corners. There's no mosaic underfoot, only hard dirt and flattened straw. Mainstream historical fact. The typical Roman didn't feast. The vast majority of Rome's population, slaves, laborers, soldiers, tradespeople, lived on modest, repetitive diets built around bread, legumes, porridge, olive oil, cheese, and whatever pickled or dried ingredient they could afford that week. Meat was rare, especially fresh meat. Eggs were precious. Sweets were occasional. Wine, though common, was often diluted, soured, or mixed with additives like seawater, herbs, or ash to stretch its shelf life and make the bitter tannins bearable. You duck beneath a sagging linen curtain and find yourself inside one of these homes, not a villa, but a cenaculum, a small apartment in a creaking insula. It's a single room with low stools, a smoky ceiling, and a hearth barely large enough to toast a flatbread. There are no couches here. No lounging. Dinner is upright, practical, and efficient. A mother spoons a bean mash into wooden bowls, tops it with a splash of vinegar and a shaving of hard cheese. The children tear at chunks of bread. One boy dips his crust into a bowl of fig paste, carefully rationed. They eat fast, but not joylessly. The ritual is simple, not solemn. There's laughter here, and stories between bites. Someone mimics a local magistrate's nasal voice, and the entire family erupts in soft giggles. Outside, in the next building over, someone is selling grilled onions with mint. You can smell the char from the window. A pair of dock workers walk past with skewers of lamb offal, scraps from the butcher, quickly grilled and eaten while standing. This isn't decadence. This is dinner. It's not about indulgence. It's about enough. Fringe detail. Roman writers were sometimes embarrassed by how modest real Roman dining was, so much so that wealthy authors often exaggerated their own banquets or mocked the poor for their simplicity. But inscriptions in tombs and graffiti on walls show that even the humble cherished food. One scratched message near the forum reads, "Today I ate lentils with garlic and my mother smiled." Another near Ostia simply says, "Better beans with friends than oysters with liars." And there's something about that second one that stays with you. You say it aloud, quietly, just to feel how it rolls around in your mouth. You step outside again, walking toward the city's edge, where the roads widen and the homes grow larger. Eventually, you come to a place that resembles the feasts of legend, a villa sprawling over half a block, its walls painted in scenes of Dionysian revelry, its inner courtyard lit with floating lanterns, its slaves arranging wine jugs in tiers like amphora pyramids. A colonnaded hallway leads you to a dining chamber, a triclinium, where a group of guests recline on couches arranged in a crescent. Their fingers gleam with oil. They eat in slow motion, choosing from bowls of marinated mushrooms, herbed snails, poached peaches, and boiled sow's udders stuffed with peppered fish. Someone reads a poem aloud. Someone else dozes gently beneath a silk canopy. The air smells like rosewater and sweat. Yes, it's as opulent as the paintings suggest. There's gold thread in the curtains. There's music somewhere, two boys plucking at lyres with a kind of dreamy detachment. Even the dog sleeping at the foot of the couch wears a collar studded with bronze pins shaped like tiny acorns. But here's where historians still debate, how common were these kinds of feasts? Did most senators dine this way daily, or was it reserved for special occasions, religious holidays, or political alliances? Some believe the theatrical nature of these meals was exaggerated, even in antiquity. Others suggest that many elite Romans preferred simpler meals in private, using grand feasts only to display wealth or flatter guests. Archaeological finds show both sides, enormous triclinium halls with imported marble and gilded tableware, and surprisingly modest kitchens with nothing but a hearth and a pan. A servant approaches you with a small dish. Inside is something golden, crisped at the edges, and soaked in syrup. You taste it. It's a fried pastry filled with ricotta and lemon zest. Soft, warm, absurdly delicate. You close your eyes and chew slowly. But even here, at the highest table, You begin to sense the strain behind the splendor. The wine is too sweet. The laughter too rehearsed. The guests are bloated, bored. One woman pushes a stuffed fig aside with the same gesture you'd use to shoo a fly. Another man slurs a joke and forgets the ending halfway through. This isn't joy. It's performance. One guest drops a chicken bone beneath the couch. A servant retrieves it silently. Another hiccups mid-sentence and spills wine down the front of his tunic. You watch a girl no older than 10 refill a silver cup 3 times before anyone notices her hands are shaking. You're reminded, rather suddenly, that luxury is often heavy. It doesn't float, it presses. And just like that, the illusion flickers. You rise and slip out quietly, the dish still warm in your hands, and walk back toward the humbler end of town. You pass a fire pit where someone is roasting chickpeas in clay, their scent drifting gently into the night. You smile. There's a quiet moment in the alley. A boy balancing a basket of bread on his head stops to scratch his nose. A woman with a crooked back lights a small bowl of pine pitch to keep flies off her goat cheese. And from a window high above, someone sings, a lullaby, or maybe a hymn, soft and slow, the kind you hum without realizing you're doing it. Maybe the Romans didn't all feast. But they all ate. And sometimes, that's the better story. You've eaten your way through Rome's fried things, its crusty things, its grainy, grilled, pickled, spiced, and smoked things. You've tasted lentils and vinegar, honey and offal, saffron and snails. But there's something still missing. Not a course, but a coda. Something slower, rounder. Something that slides rather than crunches, that finishes rather than feeds. And here, in the quiet hush after the city's appetite has dimmed to embers, that something waits, poured into small cups and tilted slowly beneath flickering lamplight. You are looking for sweetness in a cup. And Rome is happy to oblige. The smell of wine clings to the stones as if the city itself has drunk its fill. But not all wine is equal. In fact, in Rome, wine wasn't just wine, it was identity, medicine, ritual, class, chemistry, and time, all suspended in liquid. You pass a low tavern lit by 2 candles staked in iron brackets. Someone inside hums an old tune, off-key but sincere. There's a rhythmic tap of dice on wood, but your attention is drawn instead to a row of small amphorae lined up behind the counter. They're unmarked, save for faint red ink symbols scratched on the necks. That one there. It's Passum. Mainstream historical fact, Passum was a sweet raisin wine made by drying grapes in the sun before fermenting them, an early Roman version of dessert wine. The result was thick, sweet, and fragrant, with a deep amber hue and syrupy finish. It was drunk slowly, often in small quantities after meals, and sometimes mixed with honey, herbs, or even seawater, depending on the household or occasion. Wealthier Romans aged their Passum in clay or bronze vessels sealed with resin, while others drank it fresh, sharp, and sticky. You sip. It's warm and heavy, like sipping memory. The first flavor is honey, but not the floral kind. This one tastes darker, like burnt edges, like dates left out too long in the sun. The second note is sour. A bit like fig skin, or tamarind. And then something else, smoke. No. Clove. Or something like it. You let it sit in your mouth, then tilt your head back and swallow slowly. Across the room, someone raises a cup and offers a cheerless toast. To forgetfulness, he mutters. His friends laugh, but not cruelly. They clink and sip and slouch deeper into the wood. Next to the Passum amphora sits another, this one labeled with a crescent moon carved into wax. It's filled with mulsum, a blend of young wine and raw honey, often served spiced and warm. A kind of ancient hot toddy. The tavern keeper ladles it into your cup from a clay pot kept beside glowing embers. The surface ripples thickly. You can already smell the cinnamon and something that might be ginger, or ash. You take a sip, and the warmth unspools across your chest. It's sweeter than the possum, but simpler. Less layered. The honey hits first, golden and clear, then fades to the raw young wine's bite, acidy and almost wild. You hold the cup in your hands a long time after it's empty, letting the warmth seep into your fingers. Fringe detail. Some Romans believed balsam had medicinal properties, not just for digestion, but for depression, memory, even virility. Recipes varied wildly. One ancient physician recommended boiling wine with honey, pepper, rue, saffron, and the ashes of a fig branch, taken before dawn. Others kept it simple: wine, honey, and thyme. Outside the tavern, a street vendor pushes a cart with small ceramic flasks dangling from string. You hear the gentle clink of terracotta. He calls out, "Vinum rosatum." Rose wine. But this is no chilled pink table wine. Roman rose was made by steeping rose petals in white wine, then filtering it through linen, sometimes with the addition of sea salt or violet syrup. It's more perfume than drink. You buy a flask. The cork resists at first. When it finally gives, the scent rises like memory. Not flowers. Not exactly. More like linen left too long in the sun. A little sour. A little powdery. You sip. It's sharp, floral, and oddly salty. Your mouth puckers. Then smooths. Then you smile. As you walk, you begin to notice just how many drinking vessels the city requires. No two are quite alike. Tall silver goblets for the wealthy. Painted clay cups for the working class. Hollowed gourds for travelers. And small, flat wooden bowls carved from olive roots for children and old soldiers. In a bathhouse courtyard, you see a man drinking from a conch shell. He offers you a taste, winking. You decline politely, but he pours some into your hand anyway. It's sticky and golden and smells like thyme and vinegar. For the liver, he says. Or the gods. I forget which. Historians still debate how widespread sweet wine consumption was. Some argue it was a luxury of the elite, too expensive for everyday Romans to afford. Others point to tavern records, ship manifests, and graffiti praising balsam and possum as proof that these drinks reached deeper into Roman society than once believed. A faded wall in Pompeii reads, "Best wine with honey, 3 sesterces." No complaints accepted after second cup. Further down the street, you come to a stall with 2 old women sitting cross-legged on woven mats. They're stirring thick syrup into clay jugs, adding sprigs of rosemary and bunches of lavender. You ask what they're making. They don't answer, just hand you a tiny cup. It's cool, thick, and slow to pour. The color is the same as old bronze. You taste it. Vinegar. Fruit. Sugar. And something bitter. It's sapa, grape must boiled until reduced to syrup, then infused with herbs and sometimes dried fruit. Used as a glaze, a sweetener, a digestive aid, or, tonight, as a sipping tonic. You ask if it's wine. One woman shrugs. It used to be, she says. Now it's better. You linger longer than you mean to. The flavors aren't refreshing in the usual sense. They're deeper than that. Like cellar air. Like candied herbs. Like medicine and myth mixed together in equal parts. The sweetness isn't always sugary. Sometimes it's tart. Or floral. Or metallic. Or smoky. The kind that coats your throat and settles in your chest. The kind you don't crave until night falls and the noise fades and your body finally says, softly, yes, now. You find a wall and sit. Somewhere nearby, a lyre plucks 3 gentle notes. A dog scratches at a post. Someone laughs too loudly, then stops abruptly. A clay jug rolls gently toward your foot. You leave it be. One last drink before sleep. You pull out the flask of possum again. It's warmer now. The scent deeper. The sweetness heavier. You sip, and the syrup clings to your teeth like memory. You close your eyes. And for a moment, you think of the vineyard it came from. The drying racks. The shriveled grapes. The bees hovering nearby. The clay sealed with ash. The hands that bottled it. The lips that blessed it. The road it traveled to find you. Not all food in Rome was meant to be chewed. Some things you drank. Slowly. Silently. As the city exhaled around you. And as the wine settles in your blood, as the last streetlight flickers out, as the hum of voices fades to nothing but footfalls and sleep, you know you found the end of the meal. Not the end of hunger. But the end of need. This was Rome's final flavor. And it was sweet. By now, your footsteps feel softer. Not out of exhaustion, but out of a kind of reverence. You've eaten your way through the kitchens of emperors, the wine cellars of merchants, the spice stalls of portside dealers, and even the makeshift hearths of humble homes. And now, just when you think there's nothing left to taste, nothing left to surprise you, the city opens up one last course. But this one doesn't come from the villas. It comes from the shadows between them. It comes from hands that serve, bake, carry, peel, roast, and sweep. This chapter belongs to the people behind the food. You round a quiet bend at dawn. The city hasn't yet stirred. The forum is still cloaked in blue-gray mist, and the pigeons haven't begun their usual complaints. But already, the street beneath your feet smells like warmth. Not heat. Not smoke. Warmth, earthy, yeasty, human. Someone is baking. Mainstream historical fact, a massive portion of Rome's daily labor force worked in food production. And many of them were slaves. From the grand kitchens of patrician households to the backrooms of bakeries, enslaved people baked bread, stirred stews, pressed oils, salted fish, and carried amphorae up and down staircases from sunup to sundown. Their labor fed the empire, quietly, constantly, invisibly. You step into a small courtyard where a bakery is just opening for the day. The oven glows faintly behind a wall of clay bricks, and a boy, barefoot and dusted in flour, is stacking round loaves onto a plank of olive wood. You catch his eye. He doesn't speak, but he nods once. Behind him, a man shapes dough into long braids with quick fingers, twisting and folding with the ease of years. You recognize the rhythm immediately. This isn't just baking, it's repetition. Memory in motion. Muscle learning. In one corner, a woman ladles thick batter into copper molds shaped like fish. Sweet cakes, maybe. For the morning crowd. She hums under her breath, not a song exactly, more like a pattern of breath, a tempo to match her wrist. Fringe historical detail. Some elite Roman households had entire staffs dedicated to food alone. One household record, preserved on wax tablets from Pompeii, lists 22 names under culinary labor, including a meat boy, a pot watcher, a nutcracker, a fig washer, and someone simply listed as cinnamon minder. Whether their jobs were real, overlapping, or exaggerated, the list suggests that Roman food production was both segmented and surprisingly specialized, even within slavery. You watch a young girl with dark, careful eyes carry a basket of eggs up a narrow stair. She steps lightly, avoiding the creak of worn stones. You wonder where she's headed, maybe to a tavern kitchen. A rich man's dining room. Maybe just back upstairs, to her mother, who needs them boiled for market sale. You step back out into the street and find that it's no longer empty. The sun is creeping up behind a basilica dome, and vendors are wheeling carts down uneven stones, the wheels creaking like tired knees. A man with a bronze pan strapped to his waist is selling fried chickpea patties. A pair of boys toss vinegar-glazed chestnuts into the crowd, catching coins in exchange. Someone has set up a makeshift stall from overturned crates and laid out strips of dried meat tied with string. A dog circles twice before stealing one and vanishing. Historians still debate the exact number of licensed street vendors in Rome, but estimates range from the hundreds to the low thousands. Many weren't licensed at all. They popped up at dawn and disappeared before inspection. Some carried their entire shop on their back: bread, beans, porridge, dried fruit, all hanging from pegs or dangling in cloth sacks. You pass a woman crouched beside a brazier, slowly rotating skewers of chopped fish glazed in honey. The smell is intense, briny, sweet, faintly bitter. She looks up. "First batch," she says. "Still hot." You accept one. The glaze coats your fingers. You bite. It's strange, then pleasant, then strange again. You eat the rest in silence. Further down the street, a man is roasting bulbs of garlic over open coals, offering them split open on flatbread, sprinkled with coriander and something that might be cumin. His stand is marked with a scrap of red cloth tied to a pole, a signal, perhaps, to loyal customers. A sailor joins the line behind you and offers a tip. If it's red, the oil's fresh. If it's green, try the lentils. You laugh. You didn't know this was a system. You notice now that not all vendors are shouting. Some work in near silence. An old woman at the corner peels oranges with a thin blade, placing each section carefully into a folded leaf bowl. She doesn't call out. She waits. You buy one. The fruit is cool and sharp and exactly what you didn't know you needed. And you start to realize something. These vendors aren't just feeding people. They're anticipating hunger. Reading faces. Predicting the moment when a soldier's stride slows, or a child tugs at her mother's cloak, or a tired baker suddenly realizes he skipped breakfast again. This is food as intuition. Food as choreography. You stop at a square where a crowd is gathered around a boy no older than 16. He juggles walnuts while reciting jokes in a sing-song chant. By 2, one's cursed. By 3, the gods forgive you. His grin is full of gaps, and the crowd loves him for it. You toss him a coin, and he hands you a fig wrapped in waxed cloth. Sweet inside. Like me, he says, winking. You take a bite. It's dense and chewy, the kind of sugar that sticks in your molars. You imagine it was made not hours ago, but days, carefully sun-dried, wrapped, and saved. You wonder who made it. A mother? A sister? A slave who bakes in secret? And it hits you, how much food in Rome existed thanks to invisible hands. Unnamed. Unpaid. Unpraised. The baker who starts his dough before midnight. The girl who grinds spices until her wrists ache. The slave who tastes each wine barrel for spoilage. The boy who gathers fallen olives in silence. Rome's appetite may have been endless, but so was its dependence. Not just on farmers or merchants, but on people. People with calloused fingers, tired eyes, quiet songs, and a talent for making something, anything, into food. Even in this moment, you can feel it all humming beneath your feet. The carts. The ovens. The pots and kettles and trays. The rhythms of a city where someone is always chopping, always frying, always kneading dough in the dark. You sit on a low step and breathe in the rising scent of bread and bean paste and roasted garlic. Someone brushes past you. Someone else drops a coin into a tin cup. A sparrow hops toward a breadcrumb and then thinks better of it. The sun slips higher. Rome begins again. And you realize. The empire wasn't just fed by generals and grain fleets and taxes from afar. It was fed by 1,000 quiet hands. Most of whom never tasted the very things they made. And yet, somehow, the flavors survived. Through repetition. Through necessity. Through love, even when unspoken. You take another bite of fig. And whisper thanks to no one in particular. You followed flavor through the alleys of power and the cracks in poverty. You've licked syrup from your fingertips, chewed on salted fish guts, sipped wines aged in clay and sealed with pitch. You've shared bread with a child, sucked honey from a pastry crust, watched figs dry on wicker mats beneath skies that no longer remember the names of those who harvested them. You've eaten Rome, not in triumph, but in texture. And now, in the hush after the feast, what lingers is not fullness. It's aftertaste. There's something almost sacred about walking through an empire after its last course. No armies marching. No senators scheming. Just crumbs. Bones. Ashes in hearths. Empty amphorae still sticky at the bottom. You turn a corner and pause. There's a shop shuttered for the night, its jars cleaned, its stall swept. A faded price list still chalked on the wall: lentils, honey, vinegar, prunes, bread crusts, goose fat, dried rose petals. Nothing remarkable. Nothing you haven't seen before. And yet, it stops you. Because it's all still here. Mainstream historical fact. Roman foodways didn't disappear with the empire. They morphed, migrated, and melted into the cuisines that followed: Byzantine stews, Arab confections, medieval French sauces, Iberian vinegar candies. Olive oil, garum, leeks, fennel, dormice, flatbreads, fig wine, all left traces in language, in recipes, even in the shape of dinner plates and the order of courses. The Roman palate was passed down, not through statues or scrolls, but through grandmothers' hands and merchants' carts. You've probably eaten something Roman this week without even knowing it. You sit now on the edge of a dry public fountain, weathered by centuries. A single pigeon waddles across its cracked marble lip, pecking at the edge of a discarded date. The city feels like it's holding its breath. A soft pause in time. You notice, for the first time, how much of Rome was built to be touched. Burnished railings. Grooved columns. Hand-smooth thresholds. Food in Rome was touched, passed, kneaded, ladled, sniffed, offered, rejected, picked apart and picked again. The fingers of this empire lingered on every piece of it. Fringe historical detail. Long after Rome's fall, in the distant hill towns of southern Italy and the Levant, rural cooks kept making sauces with fermented fish paste, centuries after garum production had ceased in the capital. Some even passed down customs of seasoning desserts with pepper, of stuffing small birds with dates and pine nuts, of mixing herbs in wine not for health, but because the gods prefer it that way. When asked why, the answer was usually the same: that's how my grandmother did it. Historians still argue whether these were true remnants of Roman cuisine or later inventions layered in with the same ingredients. Were they survival? Imitation? Reinvention? What's clear is that Roman food didn't vanish. It faded. Softly. And in fading, it clung. You rise again, quietly, and begin your final walk through the sleeping city. The sky is darker now, like soft wool pulled over the world. The final baker has closed his shutters. The braziers in the street have gone cold. One by one, lamps are being snuffed out, little dots of life disappearing into ash. And still, you smell it. The last smell. The scent of something recently roasted, maybe aniseed, or dried plum, or the crust of bread from hours ago. It clings to your clothes. To your memory. To the skin of your arms. You pass a wall etched with names, some scratched deep, others barely visible. Lovers. Traitors. Slaves. Patrons. Bakers. All eaten. All digested by history. And yet their spices linger. Their techniques. Their cravings. Their jokes about overripe grapes or tough cuts of mutton. You come to a doorway where an old woman is seated on a crate, cradling a linen bundle in her lap. She isn't selling. She isn't begging. She's simply waiting. She looks up at you with eyes soft as bread dough and offers you what she holds. A flat barley cake, pressed with cheese, with a smear of fig paste curled in its center. You nod. Take it. Bite. And somehow, impossibly, it's warm. You taste ash. And thyme. And barley. And the sweetness of something long saved, made not for luxury, but for memory. And this is the final flavor. Not grandeur. Not conquest. Not spectacle. But something made quietly, passed hand to hand, mouth to mouth, century to century. Something ordinary. Something patient. The empire is gone. But the flavor? The flavor stays. And now, with your belly full and your breath slowing, the streets of ancient Rome begin to blur behind your eyelids. The torchlight has dimmed to an ember. The ovens are silent. The oil jars are sealed. Nothing stirs in the bakeries or the kitchens or the markets. Even the shadows seem to yawn. Let it all soften now. Let the crackle of roasting chestnuts become the rustling of sheets. Let the clang of bronze ladles become the sigh of distant wind. Let the sticky sweetness on your tongue dissolve into the quiet warmth of your pillow. You have walked the roads of an empire, but you have done it gently. You have wandered not through battles or statues, but through tastes and toasts, through burnt crusts and overripe plums, through brine and batter and breadcrumbs. You have eaten like a Roman. Not just like an emperor or a senator, but like a child on a doorstep, like a slave with flour on her hands, like a street vendor balancing breakfast on his back. And now, in this soft silence, you get to rest like one. The night folds over your body like a warm cloak. The fig cake settles in your stomach like a stone dropped into water. Every step you took now returns to you, softer, quieter, until even the crunch of gravel becomes a lullaby. You are still. You are full, not with food, but with something older than hunger. Something that says, you were here. You tasted. You remember. Now let it go. Let your hands go still. Let your jaw slacken. Let your thoughts drift, like rising steam, like breadcrumbs in wine, like sleep in the bones of an old city. Inhale gently. Exhale slower still. There is nothing left to chew. Only dreams. Sweet ones.